Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The long steel room buzzed with tension, maps pinned to the walls, coffee steaming in paper cups, fingers tapping against folders. Yet as she walked in, the air shifted almost imperceptibly, chairs squeaked, conversations stuttered into silence, and then nothing, as though her presence didn't deserve acknowledgement. She carried her file under one arm, boots striking the floor with precise rhythm. Every step echoed against the sterile walls, yet not a single pair of eyes welcomed her. They looked through her, around her, beyond her. She set her file on the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down with quiet, deliberate dignity. The weight of their silence pressed harder than any insult. She let it sit. The commander cleared his throat, flipping open his folder. "Operation Harrow Valley," he said, his voice gravel and exhaustion. "Remote terrain, high-risk activity, extraction point uncertain. Intel reports say," his words blurred into the background hum of her thoughts. She didn't miss a single syllable, but her focus wasn't on the mission, not yet. Her focus was on the unspoken. The flick of a soldier's eyes toward her sleeve, noticing the faint scar below it. The faint snort when she leaned in to take notes. The muttered comment, barely audible, "She won't last the night." They didn't think she belonged. And yet she sat straighter, hands folded calmly on the table. Dignity was not defiance. It was steadiness. It was breathing evenly when the air itself wanted to choke you. But inside, her stomach tightened, a knot pulling against itself. She hadn't forgotten the last mission, the mistakes she had made, the loss she still carried. A face, warm, familiar, flashed across her memory. A laugh she hadn't heard in too long. A porch light burning dim on a quiet street back home. A hand lingering at a doorframe, not wanting to let go. "Don't go," he had said. But she had. And now she was here, in a room full of people who would never know how heavy that choice had been. The commander's voice cut through her reflection. "You'll be moving before first light, helicopter insertion, ground sweep through the valley. Objective is," his words slowed. His eyes lingered on her name in the file. Something in his gaze questioned her, doubted her. She held his stare, not aggressively, not apologetically, just steady. He blinked first. The meeting ended with a scrape of chairs, bodies rising, conversations flooding back in. None directed at her. Boots shuffled out, voices low, laughter forced. She stayed a moment longer, fingers lightly brushing the edge of her file, grounding herself in silence. When she finally stood, the room was empty. And in that emptiness, she let her breath fall out, slow, heavy. Her reflection in the glass window looked back at her, dirt shadows under her eyes, lines carved by sleepless nights, lips pressed into a thin resolve. "You don't belong," she whispered under her breath as though repeating their judgment. But then, softer still, "But I know why I'm here." The file in her hand carried more than orders. Tucked between the pages was a folded photo. She didn't take it out. Not yet. The sight of it was both anchor and knife, and tonight she needed steadiness more than wounds. The barracks were loud with pre-mission routines. Armor checked, weapons cleaned, voices rising in crude jokes to mask fear. She walked through it unseen and unacknowledged. Her cot sat at the far end near the wall. She laid her gear down carefully, every motion deliberate, every strap and buckle a ritual. Two soldiers nearby whispered. One laughed. She didn't catch the words, but the tone was enough. She felt the heat in her chest, the flare of anger begging for release. She pressed it down. Dignity was not silence born of weakness. It was silence chosen in strength. She pulled the photo from her file and slipped it into her chest pocket, close to her heart. A reminder, a reason, a promise. As the barracks lights dimmed, she lay back, boots still on, staring at the ceiling. The hum of generators filled the air. She listened to the shifting of bodies, the rustle of blankets, the coughs, the muttered prayers. Sleep evaded her as it always did before a mission. But she didn't fight it. Instead, she let her mind wander to the porch light, to the warmth of a voice that once steadied her more than any rifle ever could. The last words spoken to her lingered, whispering through the dark. "Don't go." And still she had. Because dignity meant not walking away from the fight you were born to face. Morning came in dust and roar. The helicopter blades tore through the sky, chopping the desert air into a violent storm. She stood at the edge of the landing zone, helmet tight, rifle slung, dust clawing at her face. One by one, the soldiers climbed aboard. She followed, boots thudding against steel, strapping herself in beside men who looked everywhere but at her. The engine screamed. The world outside blurred into swirling sand. She gripped the strap above her, knuckles white. Across from her, Ramirez chewed gum like his life depended on it. Next to him, Cole polished the edge of his rifle with obsessive precision. Each carried their own rituals, their own anchors. None shared them with her. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. The roar of the blades faded. In its place, memory rose, the sound of crickets on a warm summer night, the hum of that porch light, the low timbre of a voice that always believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. She opened her eyes. The present rushed back in gun oil, sweat, the sting of dust. 2 minutes, the pilot shouted over the comms. Her pulse quickened, breath steady, controlled. She reached for her rifle, cold steel, familiar weight. She pressed the photo tighter against her chest, hidden but felt. The soldier beside her muttered, "This is suicide." She didn't look at him, didn't answer. The valley was opening below them, a maze of stone and shadow. Her hand didn't shake. Her resolve didn't falter. But deep inside, a question still gnawed, quiet and relentless. Would her dignity hold when the valley swallowed them whole? The first crack of gunfire came before they even touched the ground. It split the sky wide open, echoing off the cliffs, a sound so sharp it pierced bone. The helicopter jolted hard, banking left, dust swirling in violent waves. Soldiers shouted, bodies swaying against harnesses, weapons snapping into hands. Her heart slammed once, then steadied. She leaned forward, eyes scanning through the side door as tracer fire streaked past like angry comets. The valley stretched below, jagged teeth of rock, shadows swallowing whole ridges. Somewhere down there, unseen eyes waited, watching. "Hold on," the pilot roared. The chopper lurched again, rotors screaming. Another burst of gunfire rattled the frame. She felt the vibration in her chest, her teeth, her spine. And then impact. The landing skids hit hard. Metal shrieked against stone. Dust exploded upward, choking the air. "Go, go, go." They spilled out, boots slamming the earth, bodies diving for cover. The roar of the helicopter rose as it clawed its way back into the sky, disappearing into the chaos above. And just like that, they were alone. The gunfire stopped. Silence. A silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like breath held too long, like something coiled, waiting to strike again. She crouched low behind a slab of stone, rifle pressed tight against her shoulder, scanning the ridges. Nothing, just shadows shifting in the morning light. The commander's voice crackled through the comms. "Form up, move east, stay tight." They moved, boots crunching against gravel, breath shallow, eyes darting. Every step echoed too loud, like the valley itself was amplifying their presence. She felt it the way the landscape seemed alive. The cliffs weren't just rock. They were walls of eyes, watching, judging, waiting. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, fingers brushing the worn steel. It steadied her, like holding onto something that couldn't doubt her, couldn't question her right to exist in this space. Unlike the men at her side. "Contact front." The shout snapped through the comms. A figure darted between rocks ahead, too fast to target. Gunfire erupted. Echoes bounced off the cliffs, turning direction into confusion. She dropped to her knee, scope rising to her eye. She scanned, breath in, breath out, a flicker, movement. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but she didn't fire, not yet. She waited. The world narrowed, just heartbeat and glass. Then there, A head lifted for half a second, she squeezed. The figure dropped, stone dust puffing into the air. For a moment silence reclaimed the valley, then a mutter crackled through the comms. "Nice shot." The voice was grudging, reluctant, but undeniable. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her pulse was still hammering, her hands trembling even as her rifle stayed steady. The silence after the trigger was louder than the shot itself. It always was. She pressed her lips together, forcing her breath even. Dignity didn't celebrate survival. It just carried it. The valley narrowed as they moved, walls rising on either side, casting long shadows that swallowed the team whole. The sun climbed higher, but down here, light barely touched the ground. Every step felt deeper, like walking into the throat of some ancient beast. Sweat burned her eyes beneath the helmet. The comm stayed mostly silent, broken only by quick commands. But beneath the silence, tension grew. They all felt it. The knowledge that something was out there, just beyond sight, trailing them. Hours blurred. The heat pressed down like a hand. Her throat dried to sandpaper. Still, she kept pace, boots steady, rifle ready. She thought about the photo pressed against her chest, about why she was here. The others thought this mission was about orders, objectives, enemy strongholds, but for her it was about something smaller, simpler, a promise whispered under a porch light, a vow she hadn't yet fulfilled. "Hold," the commander raised a fist. They froze. She listened, at first nothing, then faint, a stone clatter echoing from behind. They turned as one, rifles raised. Silence again. Her breath caught in her throat, eyes straining against shadows. Nothing moved. Then a whisper on the comms. Ramirez, voice low, "We're not alone." The words weren't a revelation. They were confirmation. Night crept over the valley like ink spilling across the sky. They found a narrow overhang, shelter enough to rest. One by one, the men slumped against rock, exhaustion carving lines deeper into their faces. She sat apart, rifle across her knees, eyes scanning the dark. Sleep felt impossible. Too many shadows, too many eyes that weren't theirs. Ramirez sat down beside her, surprising her. He pulled off his glove, flexing his scarred hand. The scar caught the pale light, an ugly ridge of memory. "Accident?" she asked quietly, her voice barely more than breath. He shook his head. "Number mistake." His gaze dropped, eyes far away. "Dropped the wrong signal. Airstrike hit our own position, cost my buddy his life." He swallowed hard. "That was 3 years ago. Haven't slept right since." She looked at him, really looked, not as another soldier who doubted her, not as part of the wall of silence, but as a man carrying his own ghosts. "You're still here," she said softly. His eyes flicked to hers. For the first time there was no mockery there, just exhaustion, and maybe respect. They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. The silence between them felt different now. Not judgment, not exclusion, just two people carrying wounds too heavy to name. Dawn came sharp and brutal. The valley lit up with sudden fire. Explosions ripped through the rocks ahead, heat slamming into their faces. The air filled with dust and screams. Ambush. They dove for cover. Bullets tore into stone, sending shards flying. The ground shook beneath their boots. She pressed flat against the earth, heart pounding. Her ears rang with chaos. The commander shouted orders, voice lost in the storm. Through the haze she saw him stumble. The commander. His body pitched forward, collapsing into the dirt. Everything slowed. She didn't think, didn't weigh options. She just moved. Her body launched forward, boots hammering, arms reaching. She dragged him toward cover, bullets tearing the ground around them. His weight crushed her shoulder, but she didn't stop. Breath ragged, muscles burning, she pulled him until they slid behind a wall of stone. He looked at her then, shock in his eyes. The same eyes that once doubted her file, her presence, her belonging. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Because dignity wasn't about being acknowledged. It was about doing what had to be done, no matter who was watching. When the gunfire finally faded, the valley returned to silence. Smoke drifted in the orange dawn light. Bodies slumped, some breathing, some not. The team gathered, hollow-eyed, dirty, broken. They looked at her differently now, not with warmth, not with welcome, but with something closer to acknowledgement. She didn't smile, didn't let relief show. Because deep inside, the truth still echoed. They hadn't seen her, not really. They would never know the full weight she carried. The nights she cried alone, the grave she visited when no one else watched, the promise pressed against her chest with every step. And yet she stayed silent. Because sometimes dignity doesn't argue. Sometimes dignity doesn't demand. Sometimes dignity just endures. She stood over the shattered rocks, dust swirling around her boots, the silence after the firefight pressing heavier than the gunfire itself. The valley held its breath, and so did she. Bodies lay scattered, not all of them enemies. Some wore the same uniform she did, now torn and dirt-stained, their eyes open but empty. She forced herself not to look too long, not to let the faces burn into her mind. She had enough ghosts already. The commander sat slumped against a boulder, breathing ragged, blood seeping through the fabric of his sleeve. The medic knelt beside him, hands working quickly, muttering under his breath. Others stood watch, rifles aimed outward, but even their vigilance felt thin. They were shaken, every one of them. And through it all, no one said her name. They knew what she had done, dragged him out under fire, pulled him back when the bullets rained. But acknowledgement was a currency they weren't ready to spend on her. Not yet. She didn't mind. She didn't need their words. The only voice she needed was the one that whispered in her memory from a porch light long ago, "I believe in you." Her fingers brushed the photo inside her vest, a brief touch, grounding her. A secret reminder no one else could see. The silence stretched, broken only by the commander's strained breathing. Then his eyes lifted, meeting hers. They held there for a long moment. He didn't speak. But the look was different now, not filled with dismissal or doubt. Something else lingered there, something closer to respect. Still, she turned away before he could hold it too long. She wasn't here for his approval. They moved again by midday, slower this time. Weary. The valley stretched on, endless walls of jagged stone that seemed to close tighter around them with every mile. The sun baked down, unforgiving, heat shimmering against the cliffs. Sweat pooled under her armor, dripping into her eyes. Dust scratched at her throat. The weight of the rifle felt heavier with each step. But she didn't slow, didn't falter. She carried herself steady, one boot in front of the other, because stumbling meant weakness, and weakness in this place was invitation. The men around her grumbled. One cursed the heat, another cursed the mission. The commander, arm now bandaged, limped but pressed on. His jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. Hours blurred. Each turn of the valley looked the same. Stone, shadow, silence. And in that silence, thoughts crept in. Why am I still here? Not in the valley, but in uniform. In this life. She had asked herself that countless nights, staring at barrack ceilings, tracing scars on her own hands, wondering if the sacrifices were worth it. The answer always came back to the same place, the same face, the same promise whispered in the glow of a porch light. Don't go, he had said, but she had gone, because belonging wasn't about comfort. It was about carrying dignity through fire, even if no one else understood. By late afternoon, they found shelter near a shallow ravine. The team spread out, scanning ridgelines, checking ammo, drinking water sparingly. The mood was heavy, exhaustion hanging over them like a storm cloud. She sat against a rock, letting her breath slow, the rifle balanced across her knees. The sky above was streaked with orange, the sun dipping low, shadows stretching longer across the valley floor. Ramirez approached, his scarred hand flexing absently. He crouched beside her, offering a canteen. She hesitated, then accepted, water cool against her parched throat. He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "Didn't think you'd make it through that ambush." She raised an eyebrow, and now. He smirked faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Now I'm not so sure you're the one who doesn't belong here. The words caught her off guard, not quite respect, not yet, but closer than anything she had heard from the rest of them. She didn't reply, just handed the canteen back. Silence lingered between them, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was almost shared. Then he shifted, voice dropping lower. I had a sister, younger than me, always wanted to prove herself. World didn't give her much of a chance. She died before she could. His jaw tightened, eyes distant. When I see you, I think of her. Maybe that's why I was hard on you. She felt the weight of his words. For the first time, one of them wasn't just a uniform. He was human, broken in his own way, carrying ghosts just like her. I'm sorry, she whispered. He nodded, yeah, me too. Then he stood, brushing dust off his knees, and walked back to the others. She watched him go, something inside her shifting. For the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. Night fell again, bringing with it the cold. The valley's silence turned sharper in darkness, every sound amplified, every shadow deeper. The team huddled close to the rocks, eyes heavy but nerves on edge. She stayed awake, rifle ready, listening to the wind scrape across stone. Sleep didn't come easy anymore. Not since him. Not since the night she had chosen the mission over the porch light. She thought of his face, the way his hand had lingered at the doorframe. The words he had spoken not out of weakness but out of love. Words she had ignored because the pull of duty had been louder. Was dignity worth the cost? The question gnawed at her, sharper than hunger, deeper than fatigue. Every sacrifice had its weight, and hers was measured in the distance between what she chose and who she lost. Her hand brushed the photo again, folded edges worn soft from years of carrying it. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. The image was burned into her memory. Somewhere in the darkness, a rock shifted. She froze, rifle snapping upward. Her eyes scanned the ridges. Silence again. Nothing moved, but the hair on the back of her neck prickled. They weren't alone. And deep down, she wondered, were they the hunters here or the hunted? Dawn came pale and gray, clouds smothering the sky. The valley looked different in the muted light, harsher somehow, less alive, more grave-like. They moved again, boots crunching against loose stone. The commander limped but didn't complain. Ramirez kept scanning the rear. Cole muttered to himself, words she couldn't make out. She stayed silent, her thoughts inward. The valley was testing them, grinding them down. Piece by piece, it was stripping away bravado, arrogance, noise, leaving only the raw truth of who they were underneath. For her, it revealed something she had always known. Belonging wasn't about being welcomed. It was about standing, even when unwelcome, about carrying dignity, even when ignored. But the others, she wasn't so sure what it would leave them with. Hours passed. Hunger gnawed, thirst clawed. The sun never fully broke through the clouds, leaving the world in a haze of gray. And then movement. Far ahead at the edge of a ridge, shadows too many to count. They froze as one, rifles raised, breath held. The valley had been watching them all along, and now it was ready to strike. She stood in the cold rain, boots sinking slightly into the mud, her uniform clinging to her shoulders. Why did the weight feel heavier than usual tonight? Not from the gear, not from exhaustion, but from the silence of men who didn't believe she should still be standing among them. Their eyes didn't follow her out of respect. They followed her out of doubt. And yet the doubt didn't crush her. It carved her. The mission briefing echoed in her head as she leaned against the Humvee, watching the mist curl across the ruined buildings ahead. Their objective was simple on paper: secure a downed drone before insurgents found it. But nothing about this terrain was simple. Broken windows became snipers' mouths. Shadows carried rumors of ambushes, and somewhere in those shadows, an enemy waited. She didn't speak as the lieutenant checked his rifle for the third time. He was younger than her, bright-eyed, confident, unscarred by the kind of failure that teaches you humility. When his gaze finally slid toward her, she caught a flicker of hesitation. Like he wanted to give an order but knew she wouldn't need it. She wasn't here to follow. She wasn't here to prove. She was here because, deep down, she couldn't walk away. The convoy rolled forward, engines growling low. She rode shotgun, fingers brushing the edge of her rifle, but her mind drifted, not to fear but to memory. A kitchen table, her father's voice. His words had stayed with her long after he was gone. Dignity isn't loud, it's how you stand when no one wants you standing. He hadn't lived long enough to see her enlist. Maybe that was a mercy. He wouldn't have had to hear the comments, the whispers, the dismissals. She carried those in silence. The first shots came sudden, cracking against steel like hammers. The windshield spidered but held. She ducked instinctively, her heart punching her ribs, the sound of rounds rattling the armor. The convoy ground to a halt, soldiers spilling into cover. Commands shouted. The rain masked the dust of bullets chewing into concrete. She moved before thinking, sliding out of the Humvee, mud splattering her knees. The lieutenant barked something, but his voice blurred against the gunfire. She had seen the glint, second floor, far left window. She lifted her rifle, steady, breath slow despite the chaos. One pull, one breath, silence. The glint vanished. Nobody cheered. They never did. She wasn't here for cheers. She pressed her back to the Humvee, listening. The firefight wasn't over. Another burst rattled from the rooftops, then a grenade rolled across the mud, its metal body hissing rainwater. She didn't think. Her boot kicked it back, the motion sharp, almost instinctive. The explosion tore air into fire but away from the convoy. A shockwave rippled through the rain. The lieutenant's voice finally cut through. "Move, secure that building." They sprinted, boots thudding against soaked earth. Inside, the building smelled of mold and smoke. Every creak of the stairwell made the silence heavier. Her breath was steady but shallow, her eyes scanning for shapes in the dark. At the landing, they paused. The lieutenant raised 2 fingers. She noticed the shake in his hands. He hit it quickly, but she saw. For all his confidence at the base, the field stripped men bare. And here he was, bare, young, uncertain. She leaned close, whispering just one word, "Steady." His eyes flickered to hers, and for the first time he didn't look past her. He looked at her. The sweep continued. They found spent casings, a still-smoking rifle, but no bodies. The enemy had melted into the rain, ghosts with guns. That was the hardest part of this place, not seeing who hated you, only feeling the hate linger like a fog. Back outside, the rain had eased into a fine mist. The convoy reformed, tighter now, like the firefight had sewn them together with invisible thread. Still, when she climbed into the Humvee, the silence returned. No words of acknowledgement, just the weight of being the one who didn't belong. But as the engines rumbled again, she caught the lieutenant's reflection in the cracked mirror. He wasn't looking past her anymore. He was studying her in silence, like he had just witnessed something that didn't fit the story he had been told. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she carried another story. One she hadn't spoken. One that followed her with every step in this uniform. A story about loss, about a brother who never came home, about a letter she never had the chance to write. And as the convoy rolled toward the ruins where the drone waited, she wondered, if they ever learned why she truly fought, would it change how they saw her? Or would her silence be the only way to keep her dignity intact? The rain answered with nothing but quiet, and quiet, she had learned, could sometimes be the loudest truth of all. The night was unnervingly still. Why was it always the silence before dawn that felt more dangerous than the chaos of gunfire? She crouched low in the rubble of a half-collapsed wall, her rifle steady, her breath shallow against the damp air. The convoy had stopped miles back. Now it was only a small unit moving forward, tasked with finding the downed drone before enemy hands could strip it clean. She could feel the others behind her, their presence heavy but uncertain. They didn't trust the silence. They didn't trust her either, not fully. That doubt still clung to their faces, even after the firefight, even after she had steadied the lieutenant's shaking hands. The broken city stretched before them, a maze of alleys and hollowed-out buildings, every shadow deep enough to hide a man with a trigger. She raised a fist, signaling halt. The sound of dripping water echoed faintly from somewhere inside the ruins. A pipe maybe, or something else. Her thoughts drifted again, uninvited, back to her brother. His name was Daniel. He had worn the uniform before her, braver than her, louder, full of the kind of energy that burned too fast, too bright. He'd been the one who inspired her to join, though he never knew it. He never had the chance to know. His last letter had been short, rushed, written on the edge of exhaustion. "I'll be back before you know it. Save me a seat at the table." He hadn't come back. And so she carried the seat. Empty, every mission, every deployment, her secret weight. The lieutenant's voice cut into her thoughts, hushed, urgent. "You see something." She didn't answer, not right away. She let the silence hang, let him feel what she felt, that constant edge between suspicion and certainty. Then she nodded toward the skeletal remains of an office building. The second-floor window gaped open, a curtain fluttering in the breeze, too gentle, too staged. They moved, slow, deliberate, boots kissing the concrete like whispers. At the doorway, she raised her hand again, motioning them back. She slipped inside alone, her footsteps syncing with her pulse. The smell hit her first, burnt electronics, scorched metal. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom. There, half buried under fallen ceiling tiles, was the drone. Its body fractured, one wing bent awkwardly, but intact enough to hold data. Data the enemy would pay dearly for. She crouched, brushing debris aside, fingers grazing the cold shell. Relief should have come. It didn't, because she noticed something else. A wire, running beneath the debris, taut, waiting. Her chest tightened, a trap. She froze, every nerve screaming. She had seen this before, on Daniel's last deployment, in the report she wasn't supposed to read. A hidden charge, a careless move, gone in a flash. Her throat went dry. Behind her, the lieutenant whispered sharply, "What's wrong? Grab it, let's move." She didn't turn, didn't breathe. Instead, her voice came low, deliberate. "Nobody moves, there's something here." The room shifted in an instant. The others tensed, rifles raised at shadows, breaths caught in their throats. She leaned closer, tracing the line with her eyes until it disappeared beneath a cracked floor tile. She didn't need to lift it to know. Pressure trigger, old but deadly. She exhaled, steady, controlled. Then she spoke almost to herself. "They wanted us to rush." The lieutenant's voice broke the quiet. "What do we do?" He sounded younger than he had back at the base. Younger even than the firefight. Like a boy waiting for an answer he didn't have. She glanced at him over her shoulder. His jaw was tight, his pride wounded by the fear he couldn't hide. And for the first time she let him see her, not the soldier they doubted, not the outsider they dismissed, but someone carrying a weight heavier than his. Her words came softer than she intended. "We stay calm, we respect the silence, and we don't make the same mistakes twice." She lowered herself, tools drawn from her vest, hands working carefully, almost tenderly, as though she were touching something fragile and alive. Each movement echoed the lessons Daniel had once scribbled into his notebook, lessons she had read 1,000 times after he was gone. Sweat trickled down her temple despite the cool night. Her breath slowed to match the rhythm of her hands. Every scrape of metal on metal felt like thunder in the silence. But at last she found it. The charge nestled under the tile, wired crude but clever. With one final breath she disarmed it. The click was almost inaudible, but to her it was the sound of her brother's voice, of a chair waiting at the table. She sat back, hands trembling only now after it was done. The others exhaled, relief breaking through their fear. The lieutenant muttered something under his breath, half gratitude, half disbelief, but his eyes no longer doubted. They carried something else. Respect, maybe, or shame for ever thinking she didn't belong. She rose slowly, brushing dust from her knees, her dignity intact, her silence unbroken. She didn't explain how she knew. She didn't tell them about Daniel. That was hers to carry. They secured the drone, lifted it with care, and began the long trek back. The city around them seemed quieter now, as if it, too, had held its breath during those tense minutes. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the last test. Not for the mission, not for her, because belonging wasn't proven in a single moment. It was earned again and again in silence, in patience, in the way you stood when no one wanted you standing. And as dawn finally broke, pale light washing the ruined city in gray, she whispered only to herself, "I'm still standing." Why did the morning feel heavier than the night? The sun rose behind thick clouds, turning the city into a pale wash of gray. The convoy had regrouped, the drone secured in its armored case, yet the weight pressing down on their shoulders wasn't lighter. It was denser, sharper, like they had survived something only to stumble toward something worse. She sat at the edge of the Humvee's hood, helmet off, hair damp with sweat and rain. Her hands, though steady now, still remembered the wire, the click, the weight of her brother's memory whispering through her chest. No one asked how she'd known, no one dared, but the silence was different now. Not doubt, not dismissal, something else. Maybe respect, maybe unease. The lieutenant paced a few steps away, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking from the secured drone to the ruined skyline. He was restless, trapped between pride and fear. She could see it in the way his hand lingered too long on his rifle, like holding it tighter would erase the shake in his grip. She wanted to tell him something, anything that might ground him, but words weren't her weapon. Silence was, and silence, wielded right, could steady a man better than speeches. The order came crackling over the radio. Their extraction point had changed. Enemy chatter intercepted, movement in the area. The new site was farther, deeper into the city's broken bones, a longer walk, more risk. The men groaned softly, curses carried under their breath. The lieutenant's face hardened, but his eyes darted toward her just for a moment before he spoke. "You heard the order. We move." She caught it, the flicker of uncertainty. He wasn't just leading them now. He was watching her, as if her silence had become a mirror he measured himself against. The streets ahead were a labyrinth of collapsed walls and gutted storefronts. Shattered glass crunched under boots, echoing too loudly in the still morning air. Every corner felt like a question, every shadow an answer waiting with teeth. She walked point, rifle raised, eyes scanning with patient precision. Behind her the men followed, their tension coiled tight. They had started spacing themselves differently, closer to her, as though unconsciously shifting toward the gravity she carried. Halfway through the sector, the first sound cut through the silence. Not a shot, not a shout, a cry, thin, fragile, human. They froze. The lieutenant raised his hand, signaling hold. The cry came again, echoing faintly from a collapsed building to their right. A child. The men exchanged uneasy glances. It could be real. It could be bait. In this war, both were equally possible. Her chest tightened. Against her ribs, a familiar ache. Daniel's last letter, the line that haunted her. "Save me a seat at the table." He had loved children. Said the only thing worth fighting for was giving them something normal again. A future without rubble and fear. She looked at the lieutenant. His eyes asked the question his lips wouldn't. Do we check, or do we walk away? She stepped forward, not rashly, not blindly, just steady. Her rifle angled low, her ears straining to catch the sound again. The cry grew clearer as she neared the building, fractured by echoes but undeniably real. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Light filtered through holes in the ceiling, illuminating chunks of debris. She moved slow, every step deliberate. Then in the corner she saw her, small, maybe 6 years old, dirt streaking her face, tears carving lines down her cheeks. She clutched a ragged doll, its head half torn. The girl's eyes widened in terror at the sight of the uniform, the rifle. She shrank back, shaking her head, whispering in a language the soldier barely understood. "SHHH." Her voice came soft, gentle, the kind of tone she hadn't used in years. She lowered her rifle, kneeling, palms open. Not a soldier now, just a human. But then she noticed it. The way the girl's foot pressed against the rubble unnaturally. Her stomach sank. Beneath the debris, wires again. A charge. They had used the child as bait. Her throat tightened. The girl didn't know. She was just sitting on death. Her heart hammered, not from fear for herself but for the tiny, trembling life in front of her. She glanced back toward the doorway. The lieutenant's silhouette filled the frame, waiting, trusting her. She whispered, barely audible, "It's okay, I've got you." Hands trembling but precise, she edged closer, eyes scanning the trap. Crude, rushed. The kind of device designed not for military gain but for terror. She had minutes, maybe less. Her mind flicked again to Daniel, to the report she had read in secret. The way his last moments were described clinically, coldly, as though he were just another body on another list. She had sworn she would never let someone become just a line in a report, not if she could help it. Her hands moved quickly, guided by memory, by stubborn will. The girl's sobs quieted slightly, sensing the calm in the soldier's movements. For once, silence wasn't cruel. It was protection. The final wire clicked loose. The device fell dead. She exhaled sharply, scooping the girl into her arms before the weight of what almost was could settle. The child clung to her, small arms gripping tight, doll pressed between them. When she stepped out of the building, carrying the girl, the men stared. Not in doubt, not in silence of dismissal, but in something heavier, something close to awe. The lieutenant's eyes met hers. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His gaze carried the weight of gratitude, of realization, that maybe belonging wasn't about the patch on your shoulder or the words in your file. Maybe it was about dignity, the kind you couldn't see until it carried a child out of a death trap with steady hands. They moved again, tighter now, the girl cradled in her arms until a villager would take her back. Each step forward echoed with a truth none of them would admit out loud. The one they said didn't belong had become the one they all followed. And as the city opened ahead, another silence grew, not the silence of doubt, not even the silence of danger, but the silence of something deeper, respect. Still, she said nothing, because sometimes dignity didn't need words. Why did the air feel thinner the closer they got to the extraction point? The city opened into a stretch of broken highway, concrete slabs jutting upward like tombstones, vehicles long abandoned, skeletons of another time. Every sound carried too far here, boots crunching gravel, the click of rifles, even the shallow breaths of men trying not to betray their nerves. She felt it in her bones, the ambush was coming. The quiet wasn't natural, it was planned. The lieutenant's voice came low, barely a whisper. "Eyes up, stay sharp." His tone had shifted since the night before, firmer, quieter. He wasn't posturing anymore. He was leading, but still his eyes, when they slid toward her, revealed where his steadiness came from. The girl had been handed off hours ago to a villager the convoy trusted. The weight of that small life had left her arms, but the ghost of it remained. The way the child's fingers had clung to her sleeve. The way those eyes had looked at her, wide and terrified, then trusting. That look had carved itself into her chest deeper than shrapnel ever could. Now her arms felt empty, and yet heavier, because she carried the responsibility of what it meant to be trusted, even for a fleeting moment, with a life that fragile. Ahead, the extraction point loomed, a stretch of cracked asphalt where the helicopter was supposed to land. Too open, too exposed, every instinct screamed it was wrong. She slowed her pace, scanning the ridges. Shadows clung to the overpass. The mist had lifted, but the air carried that uncanny stillness right before something breaks. She raised a fist, signaling halt. The men stopped immediately, eyes on her. No hesitation this time, no doubt. Her gaze swept the ridgeline again, and then she saw it, a shimmer, just a glint, metal catching the weak sun, a scope. Her voice was low, calm. "Snipers." The word froze them. Their breaths shortened. The lieutenant clenched his jaw, cursing under his breath. They were pinned before they had even reached the zone. The first shot cracked an instant later, ricocheting off a concrete slab. Dust burst into the air. The men dove for cover, the silence shattered by chaos. She pressed against the ruined husk of a car, her heart pounding but her breathing steady. The sniper had good range, good angle. They'd never make it across the open road unless someone changed the equation. The lieutenant's voice came sharp, urgent. "We need to move. We can't stay boxed in." She glanced at him, at his men crouched and waiting. Fear edged their eyes, and then she thought of Daniel again. The letter, the empty chair, the promise unkept. She couldn't undo his fate, but she could make sure these men didn't share it. Her decision formed before she even thought it through. Some choices didn't come from logic. They came from something deeper. "I'll draw fire." The lieutenant snapped his head toward her. "No, that's suicide." Her gaze didn't waver. "They want us pinned. Someone has to break it." For a long moment silence held between them. His jaw worked, his eyes fierce with conflict. Then softer, almost a plea. "Why you?" Her reply came quiet, steady, carrying the weight of every dismissal, every doubt, every whisper she had endured. "Because they said I don't belong. Maybe this is how I prove I do." Before he could stop her, she moved. She broke cover in a sprint, boots hammering the cracked asphalt, lungs burning. The world shrank to heartbeats and the echo of her own breath. The first shot missed wide, sparks biting concrete inches from her shoulder. The second grazed the air by her ear, a hot scream passed her skin. She dove behind a chunk of fallen overpass, landing hard, her rifle raised. She caught the glint again, rooftop, left flank. Her pulse slowed, her breath narrowed. The sniper fired once more, but this time she was ready. One pull, one shot, silence. She didn't pause. She rose, moving again, drawing fire from the second glint she had already clocked. Dust erupted around her as bullets chewed the ground. Her men returned fire now, freed from paralysis, following the line she had carved. Her rifle cracked again, another silence. The second sniper fell still. She pressed against the slab, chest heaving, the echoes of gunfire rolling away into the city's bones. The road was theirs again. Not safe, not fully, but theirs. From the far side, the lieutenant's voice rang out, hoarse but alive. "Move now." The men surged forward, using the gap she had carved with her sprint, their boots pounding pavement, rifles raised. They reached her position, dropping into cover beside her, sweat streaking their dirt-caked faces. The lieutenant crouched close, his eyes searching hers. Words formed on his lips, but none came. He just nodded, a single motion, sharp, full of weight, the first true acknowledgement. She nodded back, breath shallow, but her silence carried what words never could. "I belong." The rotor blades came faintly at first, then louder, thumping the air, rattling through their bones. The helicopter, salvation or another trap. As it descended, kicking up dust and loose papers, she felt the tension in her chest ease just enough to breathe. They had made it through the gauntlet, for now. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of her proving. Belonging wasn't given with a single nod or a desperate run across a highway. It was carved, again and again, into the silence of moments where no one expected her to rise, and yet she did. The helicopter hovered lower, its shadow stretching across the fractured road. She lifted her rifle once more, scanning the ridges, waiting for the shot that hadn't come yet. Because in war, silence was never just silence. It was always waiting, always watching. And as the men filed toward the bird, she whispered under her breath, too soft for anyone to hear, "I'll stand until I can't." The air hung heavy, still holding the smoke of battles that had ended, yet lingered in the marrow of every survivor. The mountains that had once echoed with the thunder of artillery now stood silent, scarred by craters, blackened trees, and the faint smell of burnt metal. Among the ruins walked Captain Alarave. Her hands still trembled, not from fear, not anymore. Fear had been burned away long ago. What remained was the tremor of memory, of the lives she had carried across her shoulders, of the choices that refused to let her sleep. She had fought through the kind of nights that chew on the soul, where comrades became shadows and promises turned into gravestones. And now, in this fragile dawn, she carried something heavier than bullets or blood. She carried the silence after the war. Alara's boots crunched over broken stone. Her uniform was torn, the sleeves frayed, the insignia smudged by dirt and time. She passed the ruins of an outpost, where the walls were peppered with bullet holes. She could almost hear the laughter of her squad here, Ray's making a joke even under fire, Lynn humming that old lullaby she said reminded her of home, Soren complaining about rations while handing Alara the last piece of chocolate. Ghosts clung to every wall, every step. Her rifle hung across her back, not as a weapon now but as a relic. She didn't need it anymore. The war was over. At least that's what the generals claimed in their broadcasts. The ceasefire was official, treaties signed, flags exchanged, enemies turned into signatures on a paper. But Alara knew that wars didn't end when the guns went quiet. Wars ended when the memories stopped screaming. And hers screamed every night. She reached the ridge overlooking the valley, once a front line, now an empty scar of earth. From here, she could see the distant outlines of villages slowly waking up again. Civilians returning. Smoke from kitchens replacing smoke from mortar fire. Children playing in fields that had been minefields months ago. It should have been a sight of relief, of hope. But her chest was tight, because for every child running free, she saw the face of one who hadn't made it. For every rebuilt home, she saw the ruins of another that would never rise again. Her squad's voices came back unbidden, weaving themselves into the present. Alara, Ray's whispered in her memory, "You'll make it, even if we don't. Promise me you'll sing again when this is done," Lynn's voice echoed, soft as a lullaby. Soren's laugh rolled through her mind. "If you don't eat better when we get home, Cap, I'll haunt you." And they did haunt her, each of them a verse in the poem of her scars. She found herself kneeling on the ridge. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pack. From it she pulled a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Inside were tokens, fragments of her fallen squad, Ray's dog tags, Lynn's hair ribbon scorched but still faintly blue, Soren's lighter scratched but unbroken. She had carried them through fire, through storms, through missions no one believed she could survive. Now here, at the edge of a valley washed in dawn light, she placed them gently on the soil. Her lips trembled. No one was around to hear her. No commanders, no soldiers, no civilians, just her and the ghosts. And still she spoke, because silence was a weight she could no longer bear. "You carried me when I couldn't stand," she whispered. "You gave me laughter when the night tried to crush me. You gave me a reason to fight when everything told me to surrender. And now, all I have left to give you is this." Her hands pressed the bundle into the ground. She piled stones over it, one by one, until it formed a small cairn. The final grave for her brothers and sisters in arms, a place where their names could rest. Her hands shook harder, not from weakness, but from release. Alara sat back, staring at the cairn, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. For the first time, tears spilled freely. She had denied them for so long on the battlefield, there was no space for them. But here, in the aftermath, she let them come. The mountains listened as her sobs broke. The valley carried her grief, scattering it into the wind. She wept for Ray's grin, for Lynn's song, for Soren's fire. She wept for every nameless soldier whose body never came home. She wept for herself, for the woman who had walked into the war with steady hands and was leaving it with trembling ones. And when the tears slowed, something shifted. The trembling didn't stop, it never would, but in the cracks of her grief she felt something take root. Not hope, not yet, but the faintest flicker of resolve, a truth her squad had left her with. She wasn't trembling because she was weak. She was trembling because she had carried more than anyone should, and she was still standing. By the time the sun crested fully over the horizon, Alara rose to her feet. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, her eyes red but steady. She looked one last time at the cairn. Her voice, though hoarse, was steady now. "I'll carry you, always, not as weight but as fire." Her hands trembled as she saluted, not the rigid salute of protocol, but the trembling salute of a soldier who had given everything and still stood. She turned, and for the first time in years, she walked not toward the battlefield but away from it, toward life. Her boots carried her down the ridge, toward the faint sounds of children laughing in the village below, toward a world she had fought to protect, even if it would never know her name. Her story would not be written in medals or monuments. Her story lived in the lives that continued because she and her squad had stood firm. And though her hands trembled, her heart carried them with unbreakable strength. In the end, Captain Alara Vey was not defined by the battles she won or the enemies she faced. She was defined by the weight she carried, by the lives she refused to let be forgotten, by the trembling hands that still built cairns out of stone and memory. Her story was not one of fear, it was one of endurance, one of love stronger than death. And as she disappeared into the valley, a soldier walking toward peace, the wind whispered through the mountains, carrying the echoes of her squad's voices. Ray's laughter, Lin's song, Soren's promise. They were not gone. They lived in her trembling hands. They lived in her unbroken soul. And they always would.